Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to today's session. Thanks, Asida, very much for the introduction and welcome. So today we'll be having a panel discussion first, as Asida mentioned, and afterwards we would move to the ISSER to have a cocktail party. So the topic for our panel discussion would be the opportunities and challenges for underrepresented groups in tech. So we all do understand that the field of tech is evolving, especially the field of machine learning and data science. And we tend to see that underrepresented groups sometimes are not able to leverage all the opportunities that this field actually presents. And so for today's panel discussion, we want to dig deep into this topic, understand what are the opportunities that exist for us as underrepresented groups, and particularly understand what are the challenges that we face and how we can actually deal with these challenges. So to help us do this, we have a team of experts, panelists who are all exceedingly esteemed in their fields of research or industry, who would help us understand or dig deeper into the topic. And so in no particular order, I'm going to call our panelists, and I would start with Okay, so I would call on Bridget, who works as a research policy expert at Tony Blair Institute. So with a round of applause, help me welcome Bridget upstage. Okay, so for our next speaker, we have Tina, who works at OpenAI. Help me welcome Tina upstage. Okay, so I would call on our next panelist whilst we wait for Tina to get set. So our next panelist is Elizabeth, who is a PhD student in Strathmore University. So with a round of applause, help us welcome Elizabeth upstage. Okay, and then finally we have our last panelist, Ulrich, a deep mind scientist who works at DeepMind. So help me welcome Ulrich upstage.
Hi, can you tell the girl, one of the girls to bring me a flyer? Yeah. Okay.
Hi. Hi. Okay. Yeah, so welcome once again to all my esteemed panelists, and I'm really excited to have you here. You're all welcome. And I'm looking forward to an insightful discussion. Okay, so let's first start with a status check, and I'll probably want to start with you, Ulrich. Could you tell us, in your opinion, how you would assess the current AI and tech ecosystem with respect to underrepresented groups? Do you think it's becoming more or less inclusive? So what's your opinion about this?
So maybe this is an audience question. So my confession is that I know very little about underrepresentation. So I'll ask you, who is underrepresented?
Good question.
Just shout out a few keywords. Who is underrepresented? Yeah, one more? Yeah, go. Yes, a few more. Yeah. I want to hear a few more.
Somebody said 4 people.
Disabilities, any more? Okay, anyone who is from Angola, please raise your hand. Anyone from Angola in this audience? Okay, now I don't really see, the lights are bright. Who is from Sudan? Anyone here from Sudan? Okay, so back to the question. When I think about underrepresentation, there are some things that are improving, that are definitely improving in tech and the tech ecosystem. There's some things that are remaining constant, that we see no change, and there are some things that are actually regressing. Our Sudanese community is not here. They're not represented at all because of war. We have many Sudanese students who've received travel scholarships who couldn't fly because there are no flights from Khartoum. Government bureaucracy holds them back with regards to getting visas. Then if I think about Angola, we wanted an Angolese representation at the Indaba. In 7 years, we've never managed to create or connect to a community in Angola. It's also underrepresentation. But for other things like publications, NEUROPS, where underrepresented communities were really underrepresented, the gradient is good. For tech, for startups, it's really a good gradient. There's a lot of growth. But I'll pass the mic to all my other panelists.
Do you want to take it up from here?
Sure. Let me start from defining what we mean by underrepresentation, maybe. In terms of people, I work in the American AI and tech ecosystem, and here and there I'll see more people who look like me, but overall the field has been growing, so it's hard to know whether overall representation has been increasing or improving. Moreover, you have inclusion not just of people, but also of languages and of context. Right? Are languages becoming more represented? Are contexts becoming more represented? We had Dr. Gabriel here talk about the multitasking translation model that claims to be able to do translation in 200 languages, but that doesn't necessarily mean correct type of translation, or it doesn't mean that there's parity in performance for the type of use cases that people need, that people have readily available in English. That's one form of representation that matters, and I think it forecloses lots of other things that could be possible, like uses of this AI and technology in other different contexts. It forces lots of people who look like me and maybe work in Africa to have to do this sort of code switching or translation of their understanding of what is possible and translate it and apply it to what is readily available. So I'm not sure whether there are more people in the tech or AI ecosystem. If you look at the statistics that used to be published, it doesn't look like there's been much movement, but I think that inclusion also takes many other forms, and it'd be great to see more of that coming up. It seems like that might be on its way. I'm really heartened to see growing communities like the Indaba, the Masakani community, Black in AI flourishing. It would be great to see sort of their impact spreading broad and wide.
Thanks very much for those points. So if I follow, could we say that we don't sort of have the data to back this underrepresented groups? And following up on Ori's question, we had people mentioning women, mentioning disability and all of that. So is it because we haven't clearly defined, or underrepresented groups refer to all of these people, and we don't have enough data to sort of back like how underrepresented groups, initiatives targeting underrepresented groups is growing? What really the problem in this case that's making us find it hard to answer this question on how we can assess the current AI tech space with regards to underrepresented groups? I don't know if maybe any of you could go for the question if you have anything.
I think the data exists. I don't know that it's been presented. I don't know that it's been published and acted on. It's hard to know, depending on what specific type of representation you're trying to shoot for, what actions are being taken. I think it would be great to see a positive trend. I think the data exists, though. NeurIPS, in particular, has been making concerted efforts to foster contributions from lots of different groups, but that's the extent of my knowledge. I don't know if...
If I may say something on that, I think there has been a strong move for both developing and developed nations in supporting underrepresented groups. And by this, we have got companies, organizations, and people out to supporting people, supporting students, and that has created a huge impact and support to students. However, now the focus has been supporting underrepresented groups, helping them here and there, hosting conferences and stuff, and the impact is so huge. But in between the move of supporting these groups, the focus shifted from how can we have these statistics available. So as we go along, it will be now important for people now to keep a focus of how can we get this data and how can we keep this data, because it's so important, so that now we're able to see how far we are in this, how much people are being helped and stuff.
Okay, that's a very valid point. So I believe a couple of us here are co-organizers and stuff. So I think it's important, like Elizabeth and the other panelists mentioned, you keep a track on the data on how you're progressing with regards to your initiatives, what do you want to achieve, what your goals are. So probably following up on this with you, Elizabeth, underrepresented groups, tech in itself is broad. There's so many things to learn. So how can underrepresented groups find materials that can sort of help us learn and support each other efficiently and more openly?
I like the question. I must say that we have so many resources available, databases available, like we have a portal for, if you just go online and Google it right now, we have a portal for underrepresented groups opportunities, so you'll see it. We have so many available conferences and meetups. And for example, let's look at the deep learning Indaba and the impact that is created in this. But as we are having all these opportunities in databases and companies out to make opportunities available for everyone, I must say that the beginning point to getting the opportunities is the strong self-will of you just put your name in it and you just say that I so-and-so, I do recognize that I am studying, living within this location, which could be underrepresented, but I have a strong will inside of me that now that's what pushing me now to be very aggressive and active in looking for these opportunities. So you must be searching for these opportunities, and then also ensure that you keep on networking with people, both irrespective of their localities, whether underrepresented or not, so that you can have access to these opportunities. Because I've come to realize if you get one opportunity, you will realize that the people who are posting these opportunities, they are networked in other groups, and then through that, you're able to also make access to other opportunities. Let me just pose an example here. I got to know about deep learning Indaba the year 2018. So through deep learning Indaba 2018, I got to know about Google PhD fellowship. And now I'm a Google PhD scholar. So through Google PhD scholar, I got to know about Google DeepMind. So what I'll say is that we have so many portals, we have so many available conferences and stuff and trainings and sessions, and they are all networked. And now we must have a strong passion within ourselves that I'm coming from underrepresented group, our locality, and how I'm going to rise up, I don't know, but I have the strong will to rise up. And through it, now you get one opportunity, and then you get to see it's connected to this or linked to this, and then you have access to all this. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
have a strong will to rise up. Key takeaway as well. Okay, so maybe I should come to you, Bridget. You work at Tony Blair Institute, that you do a lot of work around policy, working with government. Do you currently have some policies in place or policy that is in line with providing support for underrepresented groups?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So I want to start off by giving a bit of context into what we do at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. I know being at a highly technical conference, the name may not be familiar to everyone. So what we do, and I thank the women in machine learning and data science for handing out these pamphlets. So if you have these pamphlets, you can open it and take a read with me. And my goal here is to help all of us as technical people really appreciate what policy can do for inclusion, but also for the AI ecosystem more broadly. So one of the things, the primary focus for us right now is helping governments to really understand how to use technology to increase prosperity and opportunities for their citizens. And we have a broad umbrella term called the strategic state, under which we organize all of these recommendations and policies. So when you talk about what are the policies governments are putting in place to support inclusion, we're not the government, but I can list across the continent of what I think are noteworthy policies that really help us to address this issue of inclusion. I know Tina has talked about defining inclusion. We've talked about women, disability. We know across the continent there are issues of geographic inclusion, from rural to urban areas. We know there are issues of, we've talked about gender, socioeconomic status across Africa is very important, and the role it plays in access to technologies such as AI. So some of the policies that I know across the continent governments are doing are, one, Ghana's government has the GIFIC fund. I know some of you may know of this. This is a fund whereby the telecoms companies contribute some quota to help government increase access to internet across the country, right? We talk about issues with diversity in data sets. Until we get more people using the internet, we can't really address some of those concerns. A really interesting statistic we have here is the government of Ghana says Ghana has 100% mobile penetration rate, right? So when I lived in Ghana for 6 years, and I had 2 phones. I was raised partially in the US, and I only had 1 phone. Once I got to Ghana, my cousins were telling me, you have to get 2 phones, one for work, one for play. Everyone across Ghana has so many phones. But when you look at the data, internet penetration is only 10%. Sorry, internet use is only 10%. So we have a lot of people with phones, but how do we get them using the internet to help bridge the gap that we've identified with data? Another opportunity I was just talking to my colleague about, she's Kenyan, was Kenya's government just implemented last year a policy for all of its schools to introduce programming. This is commendable. I grew up in the US, I'm Ghanaian, but I grew up partially in the US. I never took a coding course until I was in university. I think that there's a place whereby we don't really see what African governments are doing that are really impactful, really commendable, that are not being done elsewhere. So I hope these 2 examples are enlightening for the role governments can do in helping us bridge some of the diversity and inclusion issues that we've talked about so far.
Okay, and thanks very much for those important examples about what the Ghana government is doing. I think there's an opportunity for our Ghanaian friends to get to know about what the works that are being carried out by the Ghanaian government. So maybe this is a good time to probably come back again to industries and companies in general. Taina, maybe you could help us with this, probably to understand what role communities, companies such as OpenAI and Google and all the rest can do in better including our community in building more transformative technologies, probably.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would love to hear a little bit on that from some of the panelists as well. So I would say that in whatever initiative gets implemented here, it's important to have the criteria of autonomy, preserving autonomy and empowerment. Something that gets often mentioned is recruiting, right? You can recruit people who are from the community, they can come in, bring their perspectives on the technology that they're building. What can get difficult here, as Dr. Gabriel mentioned earlier, is you kind of get the whole world on your shoulders. You can become sort of like tokenized, you can become stressed out because maybe you think that you're the flag bearer for all the issues of people who are not already represented. So in the absence of empowerment, this can actually be counterproductive and ineffective. So I think companies can go that route, but ought to keep that in mind. Another thing companies can do is just invest, right? Just give resources, money, GPUs, or other resources for building data sets or community building, anything that can help communities set their own destiny in this space. I think it's going to be very unlikely that single companies that are not based in a particular context understand deeply what are the specific harms, the specific benefits that can be brought about by a transformative technology in that local context. So it's important to give people the resources to act when they see either harms or benefits. I mean, I think this exchange, this ability to exchange is also important as well, having channels for getting feedback, right? Like, I think this is not a new concept. Even the idea of red teaming a model is the idea that you need different perspectives to think about failure modes that you may not have anticipated, and I think the same applies here. Companies have to allow different people to voice their concern, to voice or act on beneficial use cases that they think are imminent. One example is, I think recently the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave, I think, $5 million in grants across the continent for companies that are doing work in the local context. I think it's 48 initiatives in general, and I'm really excited to see what comes out of such things. I think that more than just the immediate tools and applications that will come out of these groups, it'll be important for these groups to have had practical use of the technology experience that they can then spread locally, if applicable, or they can build their own solutions.
Okay. Is there anything any of the other panelists would want to add? Maybe you.
Yeah. I think an initiative like the Indaba is a great benefit to companies. I know a number of startups publish out of the deep learning Indaba. They have papers in Europe, in iClear, ICML, and it's a vehicle to really do creative things through and with the community. And what we have here is a real partnership. We have corporations, we have universities, we have grassroots movements involved. So it's really the spirit of Ubuntu. I should mention a little bit about how the deep learning Indaba started. 7 years ago, it was because a few people back then in Google DeepMind went to Google DeepMind CEO and said, please, we'd like to start some initiative in Africa. Can we get a week off work and you're not going to charge us for it and a bit of support? And the CEO said yes. I'm not sure what he was thinking when he said yes, but he says, I believe in what you want to do. And what we see here with all the companies present and the sponsors are companies saying, we actually really believe in what the community is doing in Africa. Yeah. And that's a really wonderful thing because it puts the community almost at the center and corporations coming alongside in the journey, which is a very different narrative from what we've seen before. So also thank you for opening eye and everyone else who's joined us. It's really a pleasure for us to have you here.
Yeah, I mean, if I may add, I was actually first connected to OpenAI through Black in AI, which is another organization that's been doing great work. And something I would like to add that is related to company investments in other communities like this one, like ours, would be to make sure that the investment is not conditional on sort of dependency, long-term dependencies. And I think that like letting these communities flourish in the ways that they choose to is quite important.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty much, I think we all have sort of this really nice experience from attending Indaba initiatives like this, like you mentioned, which I think have benefited a lot of people. Masakani is one of those that actually was born out of interaction and networks like this and all of that. So I think that's really valid points. But there's other thing. I mean, the topic is opportunities and challenges that face underrepresented groups of people. And I want us to move a bit back from the talks on around the initiatives that companies should do or groups, communities like Indaba should undertake, to talk now about our talents, right? Normally, I mean, we assume, or there's this thing that mostly we prefer, some employers would prefer foreign trained talents to locally trained talents. I mean, a couple of us have schooled here in Africa, probably most people here. And if this assumption is really true, and that people actually prefer these foreign trained talent, like you go get your education from outside the country and you come back to Africa, you are highly marketable than when you're trained here in Africa. My question is that could it be something that we are missing in the structure of our educational system that makes this happen? Ulrich, I know you're involved with the new master's program in artificial intelligence. Maybe you can talk a bit about this and probably give a bit of insight as to why this initiative was actually even started in the first place, maybe.
Okay, so maybe you can think of talent pipeline as a pyramid. And what we do here at the Indaba fits one layer of the pyramid. There's only so much training and teaching you can do in 1 week to enhance the ecosystem, but there are other layers in this whole pyramid of education and growth that we should strengthen in Africa. One is that there should be layers of master's degrees. Underneath the Indaba should be layers of really good high school training, very good undergraduate programs. And so what we're hoping to do through AIMS is to add layers at the master's level. I just want to make one last comment before I ask all the other panelists. I don't think there's any negative bias in Africa when it comes to hiring anyone who was trained in Africa as opposed to anyone abroad. I heard some shocking statistics from South Africa. Anyone who's from South Africa, just quickly raise your hand.
No. Not yet.
Now, you're all waiting in anxious anticipation to know what the stat is. For every job in data science and machine learning that's posted on LinkedIn in South Africa, 2.4 people immigrate and leave the ecosystem and go abroad, to Europe, to US, who knows where they're going. So there's a constant shortage of skilled people in South Africa in particular that's not backfilled. So the reality in South Africa, and this is from AI Expo Africa, is that mostly people from India are moving into South Africa to fill data science roles because Africans are immigrating. And I think this is a real challenge that we need to address and maybe just call a spade a spade. And I don't know what the other panelists would think of this.
I mean, before we move to the other panelists, I'm just interested to follow up on this because even in Ghana, it's a similar trend of people interested to move to other developed countries. The question is, what is happening? Is it that the industry here or the working conditions here are not suitable? What really is the problem? I think I would like to hear from all the panelists on this. Like, why are most of us trying to move out there? We have the skills. What is the problem? Any of you can go for it.
I think.
Okay, I think I can take that. And one, I like the question because I've experience of studying in both developed nations and undeveloped ones, and doing the same course. Like I've done a course in deep learning and machine learning as a student in Africa, like a physical class teaching, and I've done the same course in Europe. Machine learning, deep learning, and I have seen difference in how this is taught. In Africa, how we teach it. A bigger percentage is theoretical, a smaller percentage is the practical bit about it. For developed nations, when I went to that class, I saw it's kind of balanced. There are more lab sessions and theory classes are there. And then I saw so many practical classes, experiments going on assignments between the professors and the students. And now to answer that question, I've also been involved in applying for jobs and working for the two nations again. And I have just realized that employers are not looking at who is based or origins in which country or in which nations. They are more interested in who is able to deliver, who has the skill to this work that is required here. So the recruiting process and working process is equal to everybody. But as you get to this project, the employers keep an eye on who is delivering, who is doing this, who has the talent to this. And as we kept on going on the projects, I saw people drop, that is, from the projects. Employers will just terminate your contracts if you're not able to perform or do this. So I think the people living in developed nations, because of how these courses are taught and the practical bit about it, so when you go to work outside, you're able now to keep the pace, keep doing programs and developing and working. And that's why when you look online now, the statistics show that we have, these tech opportunities are more to people from represented groups than underrepresented groups. Yeah, so, and that's why now we have students in Africa and people in Africa trying now to shift to developed nations, maybe to study and do this and that. Not because of anything else, but because, of the more experiments, practical, that have been done on these courses, that will give them now the skill and the capacity to deliver when they go out to work and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Can I add on, Deborah?
Yeah, sure.
I think the challenges are probably, as we've all mentioned already, but there's an opportunity that I hope to present to this group, and which is what the public sector can do for employment in AI. And as I mentioned, one of our key areas of focus is to help government understand the opportunity and also use technology such as AI in the delivery of public services. One example we've seen recently is a partnership between NVIDIA, the UN, and some statistical offices in places like Ghana, Rwanda, et cetera. And what you're doing is you're bringing, we've talked about compute resources, you're bringing training to these statistical offices so that they can use AI to better handle some of the population data analysis that they need to do. So I want to sort of make this proposition to the group that what I see happening is the government is the public sector is going to be looking increasingly for AI talent on the continent. And we already know that the public sector is one of the biggest employers on the continent. Government hires most of the people in Ghana. So if you're thinking of ways to use your skills in country for the benefit, for prosperity of the citizens, I entice you to start thinking about opportunities in government. How can you use AI and machine learning and the tools that we all know are transformational to help make our countries better while we're here? So I hope that's a solution. It's not a problem, but I think there will be more and more opportunities, not only from companies, but also from governments around us.
Yeah. I think these are both interesting points raised, but another angle of it also I would want us to touch a bit on could also be the working conditions and everything. I think that's something that also is one thing that is pushing people away. Could this be a factor or not? Because in Ghana, for example, because I'm in this terrain, I understand this, that because people sometimes find that working for the government, they don't pay them enough, so they prefer that, okay, if I send my skills elsewhere, I'll actually get paid more. So more like the working condition is also a factor, right? Not just about the practical. And another thing that Elizabeth mentioned that I resonate a lot with is with regards to blending practicals and theory. I think it's something that I have experienced myself. I learned MATLAB on paper, not with a computer. And I wouldn't be surprised that if we speak to a number of people here, it's probably a similar experience or that kind of a thing. So I think maybe this is also something that we would want to get back to our classrooms to think about how do we structure our curriculum, how do we make things, blend both things practical and then theoretical in that sense, right? So that totally makes sense. If there is any other comment?
Yeah, and still I think that most of the funding that is available for science in African countries should be more channeled to setting up laboratories for research with these equipments. Because what really is bringing the difference between the two is just because of the existing labs, not the lecturers and not how it is taught. We just have to utilize now the funding to setting up these labs, and that will be solved.
Something I wanted to add is that point about working conditions very salient. I don't have all the data about emigration from Africa, but I think that both relative wage differences and relative abundance of work, if you do get fired, right, matters to a lot of people that I know who have emigrated. I would say, though, that there are a couple of opportunities that are presenting themselves. On the policy front, it seems like the composition of the populations that we have so many young people, right? And I think it would be a shame to let all of them leave when this transformative technology is sort of breaking out right now. And more than that, it's breaking out on a medium that can become accessible, right? Like the advent of remote work or its spread during the pandemic, I think has been a boon to many economies. Not always a good thing, right? But if we can develop ways for making remote work for young African people, I think that would be, that would also just make sane government policy, I think.
Yes, I would agree. I definitely think government should have guardrails in place to support whether it's, you know, people who have companies coming in to use our local talent, whether it's in-house, how the working conditions, as you've said, Deborah. I think, again, that's a role that government can play. And it'll take some of the technical community sort of unveiling and helping policymakers to see what the issues are to help address them.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a very valid point too. So, I mean, talking about policies where we discuss inclusion and diversity, that also usually we forget about inclusion like in AI algorithms as well. I mean, this afternoon we had a session on responsible AI where we tried to dissect and understand this topic. So like, what are the policies that governments can sort of implement to encourage AI developers to sort of prioritize inclusion in their AI algorithms? Because I think this is a very important point.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. Beyond representation in sort of the developers themselves, we're also concerned about representation of the models that they create and the products that they bring to market. Pardon me. I think it's twofold. One is what we've talked about, the importance of research, right? Research and data. Well, we don't know we have a problem until we can fix it. So I think the importance of allowing some of the I think mechanisms that Tina mentioned, right? Are there opportunities for people to voice and bring feedback on the products they're using and how it's impacting them? Can we collect statistics on bias and harm? Once we have some of that information, that will help us to better address some of the issues with sort of the models themselves. being harmful or not representative. I think that's one. The second thing we've talked about is the representation in data sets, right? And that can only happen through inclusion, expanding access to internet, some of the infrastructure initiatives that I've already mentioned, encouraging people to actually use the internet. And here I'll give an example. I think, you might have a fancy, you might develop a really cool algorithm or let's say a cool chatbot for someone to interact on education. But when you look at some of the areas that are excluded from AI, let's say the rural settings, right, what's really going to push them to use the technology is going to be public services. So I think as you, again, I'm going to put this back to the developer community. As you think about applications, is there something you can develop to help governments better deliver public services? It's like a chicken and egg problem, right? We don't have the data sets for the excluded. How do we get the data sets? We have to incentivize them to use some of these technologies, some of these tools. And I think that's the role government can help play. Can you develop these technologies that can help us address the issue? And the third, I'll say, would be procurement. We developed a toolkit. It's on our website. Again, if you look at your pamphlet, you scan the QR code. We developed a toolkit on how African governments can accelerate AI adoption. And one of the pillars that are really important and people don't talk about is the fact that government ends up procuring a lot of technology. Whether you're looking at facial recognition software, you're looking at satellites, it's usually being procured through some kind of tender process, right? So that's a place that we've said that government should look at inclusion in some of these things, inclusion in the products themselves. Can you ask the companies to produce a scorecard? Are these products inclusive? And also, can you make sure that it's representative of the communities that you're bringing it into? Let's say you're procuring a technology from outside. How culturally relevant is it the context that you're looking to bring it to? So in sum, there are so many recommendations that I think would be relevant for this, but the three would be the importance of research and statistics on the models themselves, mechanisms to help people give feedback. We've talked about the inclusion in data sets, and then finally the use of government incentivizing people to actually build products, to buy the products from them to help deliver public services better.
Okay, yeah. I think this whole thing of incentivizing people to actually deliver, I think a couple of them have been initiated in other countries that seems to work. And so I think it's good to at least reiterate why it's important that African governments should begin to think about all of these things and tap into the great talents that we have here. So just to say to the audience, if you have any questions, I'll continue the discussion, but I'll pause in the next 5 minutes to take questions. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists, you can just put up your hand, and we'll be happy to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So this question I would want to actually hear from all my panelists. I think Bridget touched on it a little bit about internet access. So largely in Africa, there are a lot of places that access to internet is still a very big problem. And usually it's textbooks that people have to use. So how do we start to shift our education opportunities at the school level, especially in countries where access to even textbooks and texts is not even guaranteed before we even come to talk about internet? So how do we shift? There are a lot of opportunities in education, right? But how do we target these communities? I just want to hear all of you, your 2 cents on this, maybe. Any of you can go first, no preference.
I guess I can go first. I'm going to call out my colleague in the crowd, Pamela, who just helped us release a resource for education for teachers in general. Teachers globally are contending with the question of what to do about ChatGPT, for example. And the thrust of that exercise was to demonstrate what are the ways in which teachers can leverage this sort of technology to make learning in their classrooms practical, effective, scalable, and more comfortable for students. And I think in the African context, we have all these additional challenges of access to computers and access to internet. I think maybe the first node to go through, the first couple of nodes would be the government and teachers. Government and teacher can collaborate to create resources that are more accessible to students than textbooks. I didn't go through all of my school years in Africa, but I did go through primary school in Cameroon, and textbooks were really, really expensive and very, very out of date. And so you are excited about learning about a subject, but you have no idea what its practical utility in the real world might be. And so these new technologies, the internet and everything that is built on top of it, I think can be leveraged in practical ways to make learning a little bit more accessible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, any other addition, follow-up on this?
Sure. I think thinking about the internet, I would like to bring up one initiative that we helped governments broker. This was in Rwanda, where TBI helped the government through their Ministry of Education and in partnership with Starlink to bring internet to 50 schools in rural Rwanda, and the government plans to expand it to 500 schools. I think if we look across our countries, we'll find some examples of this. Is it at the scale that's going to get every child in a rural area across socioeconomic background the resources they need? Probably not, but I think this is the point at which, as Tina just said, we have to continue to push more industry and government collaboration to really address some of the fundamental challenges that we've discussed around expanding access to educational tools for all students.
Okay, yes, makes sense. Any other comments?
Yeah, I want to give a call out to Data Science Nigeria is now branded to Data Science Network, and they have an ambition to train 1 million Nigerians in data science in 10 years. Oh. And I think they're going to do it. And if you look at, I really, really admire their work. If you think of the strategy, they have these memory sticks that contain everything that you could possibly download from the internet that's required to be that's required for you to become a good data scientist. They have these boxes that they send around that someone can just plug into their machines and they can get going in data science. They have primary school textbooks, the intro to data science, into Python coding. And initially thought 1 million Nigerians in data science. That's actually very ambitious, but there are 250 million people in Nigeria, so 1 out of 250 people that have to be reached and trained. So I would just sit in absolute humility and awe in what these other communities are doing.
Okay. Any data science Nigeria member or
here?
Where are you? Yeah, Wave us here. Oh, shout outs to all of you.
Stand up
Maybe let's give them a round of applause then.
Woo! If you're from DSN, just quickly stand up so people know they need to go and talk to you after this and ask you how you're doing it, what your strategy is, how you're reaching primary schools, how you're setting up your community, how you get boldness that somehow someone like me lacks.
Okay.
Okay, so you know who to speak to.
Okay, thanks so much. Do you want to follow up?
Oh, yeah. I must say that I'm always so motivated to see the strong will and the passion of people living in underrepresented groups on how they have a strong will in embracing and learning tech. And then I'm looking at this too in a version of this example, like as you've said that we have nations or places where electricity is a problem, and then leave alone tech. And then we have also people, nations, places where we have, advancement of technology and the use. So I'm looking at these two places as a place with darkness and a place with light. And the only way to bridge this up is to have the place with light start moving and the place with darkness start moving, and the two will meet at a certain point. Because you have to have the strong will that I need this and I should use this, and then those who have also should have the strong will to move and provide the services. Yeah. So as much as we are looking forward to have governments, work out all this, I do believe that the great impactful change is made by people who have a strong will and not really having much of the resources. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've heard a lot. There have been a lot of things about the governments and the policies and all of that. So I'm just wondering, how about from our own end, as people, as individuals, what can we do? What role do we have to play in this? Where do we stand? How can we help deal with all of these issues that we have mentioned so far? As individuals, as people, aside governments, is there anything we can do? Anyone?
So I've looked at how the Indaba X's have grown in the communities, in different communities across Africa, and there's one thing common to every successful community, and that's a lot of suffering. There are people who pull all-nighters and burn the midnight oil, and they do it with friends, and they get kicked, and they don't get recognized, and then they just continue. And whenever there's a flourishing community, you always find these people, and so that's one, I think, human characteristic. And I often wondered why people do this. Why do you go through this immense amount of pain to do something? And it touches on work and work environments. Who of you have ever, for no pay at all, done an all-nighter to do a cool project with a friend just because you wanted to build something? Just raise your hands. For no pay at all, in horrid conditions, do an all-nighter for a project just because you thought this was cool, and you're doing it with nice friends. Yeah, it speaks of something of the human spirit, and why we're doing what we're doing. We're not doing stuff for, I mean, eventually, when it comes to employment, pay is important, work conditions are important, but all these other social aspects of doing it with peers that you have a long-term relationship with, that you essentially suffer with, because that's how human bonds are formed. Maybe it's a controversial thing to say, but that's really how human bonds are formed. And if I could call out some examples on stage, Elizabeth, 4 years ago, did an all-nighter to check people out of the hostels in Kenya. And we went to the hostels at 9 a.m. the next morning. She was still sitting there at the table collecting keys. So what difference can you make? You can suffer together. You can just really join this community of people who are just absolutely mad and they're willing to suffer for a cause. And once we share this common cause, to try and pick people who are underrepresented, try and find someone in Angola who is passionate about machine learning, who's not connected to anyone in the community, then we'll really succeed.
Okay, and I think conferences like this gives us a very great opportunity to easily do that, right? Thanks so much. Any other comment on this? Or?
I would say that the reason I bring up government is due to scale and reach, right? I think that the government as an organization can be competent enough to take the feedback that, yes, teachers and students need these resources, we can scale and reach. But to your point about communities, I think that the community can be extremely powerful. I think communities have from my experience, at least with the deep learning Indaba and Masakane, they have sensitivities that they respond to. And so if this is something that, as large of a community as we are, people want to respond to, I think that there are enough individuals here that can pull together some resources, whether it's ideas, like cash resources or other forms of crowdsourcing to get a considerable amount of scale.
Okay, thanks so much. If there's no other, I would want to, want to make one?
Yeah, if I may add something small, I must say that you should have a passion in it, and you should have a strong will to push against the winds. Because I'm speaking from the point of supporting to organize Indaba X Kenya, for example. This has been hosted in many places and institutions, and for each, the experience is totally different. But the passion in us is more about, irrespective of the wins and the challenges, our happiness is when we see the community gather together and learn, because we do know by doing all this, we are widening the networks, and by widening the networks, we are walking towards a time when we will see tech for everyone. So, and with that in mind, it will now put a strong will and a passion within you to be out to stretch your hand and to help and support this. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Okay, so I would want to pause here to see if we have, so we can take 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Well, there are a couple of hands. Maybe we can hand them some microphones.
Deborah, as people raise their hand, I can add
Sure.
a comment. I think this idea of individual resilience, community power is really important. And I know we've mentioned government a couple of times, but again, government is made up of the people, right? And I think as we speak more about bringing more technical expertise into government, into the public sector, we can begin to see the change that we want to make. I myself, getting my master's in data science, I've been trained in data science, but I wanted to use that to further policy. And I hope that, in seeing some of these examples, we expand the pathways and opportunities for some of our technical players in our ecosystem to consider as well.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, and you have a great panel up there. I just want to, I'm over here, Ulrich, just you. Here?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to speak to your point.
Before you continue, could you just mention your name and the country you're from?
Okay, sure. My name is Kineilwe. I'm from South Africa.
Okay.
So I'm also in industry, but I'm a student, and I do have friends that data scientists, aspiring data scientists, and part of the frustration in looking for data science opportunities in South Africa particularly is you'll find that a role will be advertised, and then when you get there for the interview, they just want to know your SQL skill. Can you create views and whatever? So I know my friend's biggest frustration is that they say we're not getting real data science opportunities locally, but if you go and you Google opportunities that you get to build real Python models and experiment, and all these opportunities are from the US or Europe. I think that's one of the major reasons why people choose to leave. And I think that one of the important things about this community, or what I'm learning, is that, for example, earlier on there was a startup session where even the CEO of Lilaba AI touched on it a bit, that she's also a data scientist by profession, and she got to a point where she reached a ceiling, and that's how she eventually started to become an entrepreneur, whereas it was something that she never aspired to do. So apart from that, what else as South Africa, apart from starting your own thing and doing passion projects, as Africans, how can we get into data science roles and actually contribute to the growth of our economy? Is there another way of doing that?
Okay. I don't know which of my panelists would want to go for the question on. So if I understand fully, it's probably how to get started into the field and own it up and stay in the field as well. Okay. In Africa. Anyone wants to go for this shot?
Yeah. Let me go first. Allow me to say that as much as these technologies are available in developed nations, we have a strong groups of companies from developed nations who would like to invest in developing nations. So we have got many tech companies moving to African countries to set up their bases. And that's why when the economy of some of the developing nations strips down, it affects them. Because their focus is, these are nations who are out to embrace technologies, and when we set our companies and bases in them, we are more likely to get a market. So as much as we may have a thought of how am I going to shift to this nation and work there, these companies also are more harder working. How can I go back to Africa and set our bases there? And now the thing here is, we should now look forward to having facilities and labs where now we will teach these, courses better because of these two shifts that is invisible but is still there. Yeah.
I hope that addresses your question. Is there any other thing anyone want to add before I take the second question?
Maybe just an open question, whether African companies are more risk averse than, for instance, Silicon Valley companies, and maybe another open question might be whether the African tech ecosystem is dominated by financial institutions, banks and insurance companies who'd naturally be more risk averse in the way they process their data, etc. And then another high-level comment is the banks also have different strategies. You can see JP Morgan's up there because they're very much an AI-first institution, and not all financial institutions in Africa have the same ethos. Probably unfair to say that, but maybe there is some truth in that. The flip side is that there's really a crazy budding AI and data science ecosystem growing in Africa. It's really taking off. InstaD being a prime example of just having been sold for like $1 gazillion to BioNTech. And there are other startups that are growing at the same rate. So if you really want to innovate, there are probably really good opportunities. Also in South Africa, a number of startups have received $10–20 million levels of investment as well.
Okay, I hope this addresses your question. I can take one more question. There are a few hands. Okay, the microphone is already with someone.
Okay.
Your name and your country, please.
My name is Chika, coming from Nigeria. I want to come into what can we do to help some areas where there is no network or electricity. I'm thinking that if already we have established that there is gap in communication between the people in our institutions and industry, if there should be synergy between the people in the institutions, researching, and industry, there could be places where we will create our own local content that will help us. In the place of electricity, there are so many things we can do within ourselves that will replace those ones we think that must come from the foreign countries. So, in so many places, such things have been, people have been trying it, but you find out that at a point they get to a deadlock because there will be no funding. People will have interest to carry out some researches, but they can't fund it, and that discourages a lot of researchers. So I think that it's time for us to start looking, believing in ourselves, that we can do something that will help solve our local problems. Then, on the second part of it, we have actually established that people run away from our countries to developed countries. Yes, but I think it has been creating a lot of problems to us in our own countries. For instance, our youths are no longer interested in what we are doing within. In my department, almost everybody is running away. And when they get out, you won't see them again. They will keep asking for, they will keep renewing their, what do you call it? Their leave of study leave. Every year, they will, when that one finishes, they will send something back to renew it. at the end of the day, you find out that you can't see them again. Because one, they are there working, they have finished their research, but they are not ready to come back even to use what they have learned to develop the country. They may be sponsored by the institution, but they can't come back to use it to develop the environment. So this has caused a lot of problems. I don't know what could be done on it so that when they go out, they acquire that knowledge, bring it back home, and utilize it within our countries. I don't know if another country is experiencing it, but it is so much in my own side.
Thanks very much for the question. So she wants to know how we can bring people who go, Africans who go outside the country and then school, get educated and come back to Africa to develop Africa. What can we do?
Okay, allow me to jump into the first part of that question, where it was more about what can be done to these places where there's still no electricity and no resources. And I might just say that from my own understanding and assessment, every investor, including the government providing services to citizens and regions, they do all this with the mindset of what am I getting back from this investment? I'm setting up, I'm providing power supply in this region of this country, but what will be the return of this? And that's why, because of that dynamics, you'll find we have a nation with some regions having accessibility to power and resources and technology. And still that nation has some sections which, for many years, well known, is still lagging behind. And I must just say that now, it should be a shift for governments to shift from doing the calculations of what do I get if I plant this into this region and how much do I get. So when you just look at it keenly, you will discover that these regions that don't have electricity and resources, I mean, the total money collections or revenue received by governments from those regions is slow or it's small. And that's why you find that most of those regions now suffer poverty, while we have other regions where maybe electricity is provided and technology is provided just because of the number of people occupying those regions and the number of revenues collected. So there ought to be a shift from now governments, I mean, just to be good enough to not to do that calculations about how much am I getting from this service providing in this region. Yeah, so that's how I look at it. And then now we have to have many people and companies who are able to provide these services, trying to, provide support as much as possible to these regions, irrespective of the balance of how much am I getting out of this. So we've got many regions in Africa, countries, that still continue to suffer lack of electricity and lack of technology because of the calculations by investors, including the governments themselves, of how much am I going to get by putting this power plant here. Yeah, it's still a struggle. Yeah.
I think I would like to... Go ahead.
I just want to say, in sympathy, the struggle continues. I'm at the African Institute of Math in Cape Town. On a bad day, we have 8 hours without electricity. And then I think about colleagues who work at European universities, and they walk into labs and they flick on a switch and there's electricity. And if a lecturer or manager or director of a lab in Africa, you have 20 steps that you need to take before you can get to the start line. One of them is fixing electricity. The other one is fixing internet. We have a diesel budget that's shooting through the roof, and people look at the budget and saying, are you driving around the world? No, it's to power the generator, to keep the machines running. So you have all my sympathy and condolences, and we share the same pain. One last comment that I think should be addressed in Africa is that if you move to the US, It's very easy, it's a lot culturally easier to shift between academia and industry. And if you do a startup and you fail, it's not a shame. If you go 2 years or 3 years or 5 years without ever publishing anything, it's not a blot on your record. And unfortunately, the reality for African universities is that if you do spend 5 years without publishing and being an academic, you're really penalized for being cross-disciplinary. And I don't know how that culture will be changed, but you mentioned in your question academia and industry and how they work together. I think that's one of the core things that we have to fix.
So,
Right. I wanted to address the last question then on, I believe, on sort of the brain drain. I just wanted to comment that if you look at the economic literature, right, it's been an issue that I think on the continent we've had to face, and it's now very prominent in the AI space because of where the ecosystem has developed to. And I join everyone in very much empathizing with that concern. What we've seen in the research, and where our institute is going to come out with a paper on compute, the future of compute, and why that's actually the new digital divide. And what we're seeing in the research is still ongoing is that in countries like, let's say, Nigeria, you have a ton of developers, but then other factors like compute access or like electricity access is very low. So I know these are concerns and factors we're all very aware of in the data science community, but what we're going to help to make clear to policymakers is the interaction between the many factors that are ongoing and how that leads to brain drain. It's not, we can't say it's a causality, but there is definitely correlation between your internet access, internet shutdowns, infrastructure. All of that plays a role in how comfortable people feel in staying in the country to work. So again, the solutions we're going to bring will be multifold. I can't say, we'll say there's one thing, you do one thing and that's it, everyone will want to stay. There's not. Unfortunately, we're going to tell policymakers, you need to make sure you don't shut down the internet. You need to do more in inclusion and collecting, disaggregating data by, groups so that you can better target resources. But if it's any consolation, I think our policymakers understand that all of the migrate factors really play a role in this, and hopefully we can do what we can to help them to understand. If I could offer two, that's in the long term, right? Addressing electricity, addressing internet access, it's sort of in the medium to long term. But some interesting short-term opportunities we may want to explore are innovation hubs. We can't get everyone to have internet access or electricity access at the same time, but can we have a critical mass of startups in one area or companies in one area, so that, as my colleague has said, instead of your diesel bill for one company being $100,000, if we're all sharing those resources, is there a way that we can minimize the cost? We're also telling governments, maybe we can do partnerships on compute. Can countries also share compute infrastructure? We know that, I believe it's in Tunisia, one of the North African countries just opened their supercomputer AI lab. I think is the fastest supercomputer in Africa. I don't know if someone can correct me on the place. But that's, can other African researchers access and use some of those resources? So I definitely empathize with the concerns. I think they're medium to long term. I will say governments are aware of this and we're doing more to help them understand it. But in the short term, I think industry, in partnership with government, can find some of these short-term solutions, more around resource sharing, more around communities that can help us accelerate the development of the ecosystem.
Okay. Yeah.
And my last comment, my last comment on the question about students moving to Europe, developed nations and studying and not coming back. We must be genuine here. As I said, that the reasons as to why these students are moving outside there is because we have well-established labs to learn. And when they graduate, they discover that because those courses are well taught there, and there are also companies who have set so many opportunities related to the same on that other side. So when they look back to Africa, they say, okay, just because of how the courses are not also not practically are not taught, there are also no much more more jobs related to the same. While on the zones where they are studying, there are also so many jobs related to what they are studying. So they end up getting jobs in those nations, and life transits. So they have to keep on now working in those developed nations. So the balance here will come a time when we will have these labs well set up in developing nations, because setting the labs to teach more practicals will also spring up jobs related to machine learning, deep learning, and AI within Africa, and the balance will come to a stop. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the addition, and I hope that this helps address the question. I do understand that there are more questions from the audience, but unfortunately, we don't have all the time here. So the good news is that we have a cocktail party after here, and all our panelists are still going to be around. So if you still have more questions and you signed up for the cocktail party, I would encourage you to come over there, engage with our panelists more, and then we can get our questions hopefully answered. So I would just go one more round from all of my panelists just to hear their last words, maybe 1 to 2 sentences on what we should do going forward. What should be our key takeaway message from this entire discussion? What do you have to tell us? Just 1 to 2 words. 1 to 2 sentences, yes, from all of you.
Should I start? Come and work in government. I don't know if I've said this enough. I think we need the technical expertise. You all are brilliant. And I think if we want to address some of the concerns that we've said, I think governments are listening. They want to deliver for their citizens, and especially African governments would value the technical skills that are here. I want to offer a thanks to women in machine learning and data science for allowing us to sponsor this event. We wholly believe in inclusion, and I think it's a sentiment that governments around the world have as well. So if you're looking for employers, I think check out some of your public sector opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, for me, I will say that the world that we are looking to have lies within you and me. And we have now to be out providing services and support opportunities to people. At the same time, from this, I'm challenged enough to start now thinking about how do we get the data about the impact that we are creating in achieving all this. Thank you.
You can use the microphone, maybe.
Yes. Thank you. I would say that we're all underrepresented in some way. It might not be along racial or gender dimensions. It might just be around your view, your way of seeing the world. And I would welcome you to make noise about the ways in which these technologies are not serving you. Be loud about it. Either, post on Twitter or build a tool, build a company that does what you need this technology to do and does it well. I would be really excited to hear about any use cases that you think are not well served today, and I'll be at the cocktail party. Thank you very much to the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science group for hosting us.
Thank you.
I just want to say a few last things in a comment Elizabeth made on well-established labs and well-established initiatives and ecosystems and not having that. What is pioneering work is establishing things where there's nothing that's well-established. And so with the flux and craziness of AI at the moment and being in Africa, my challenge to you is that, and take going from this, is that within the next 5 years, you have the opportunity in your life to do the most pioneering work ever in Africa, precisely because of a lack of well-established things. And if you're not going to establish it, then no one else is. So make use of the opportunity. Now the world's your oyster. Also, the AI wave is not going to last forever. The sun's going to shine on someone else's parade in 10 years' time. So if you don't do that in the next 10 years, your chance is gone. So do it now.
So I love the ending. So do it now. Do not wait for 10 years, 20 years to start it. So at this point, I want to say thank you very much to my panelists for the very insightful discussion. I actually learned a lot from all of you, and thanks so much for making time to join this panel discussion. I also want to say thank you to our sponsors for this event. I want to say a big thank you to Tony Blair Institute and then OpenAI for making this possible. And of course, I would want to say a big thank you to all of you here for making time to join this panel discussion. And before you go to your hostels, make it a point to go to ISSER to enjoy yourself, do some networking, and hopefully you probably will find a collaborator here. And also the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science Accra, Ghana chapter. If you're Ghanaian and you want a community that you can be part of, we host monthly meetups, and you can find us on the meetup page. Just type Accra Women in Machine Learning and Data Science, and you can join the community. You can also follow us on Twitter. So thank you very much to all of you, and see you at the cocktail party. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.